Good. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bryce Wakefield and I'm the CEO of the AIIA. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we're on the Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Before we get into the introduction as well, I'd like to introduce the Australian Institute of International Affairs. I think most of you are familiar with this organisation, but the AIIA is Australia's national, independent, non-partisan organisation that is dedicated to promoting informed debate on international affairs. Its branches, we have branches in every state and territory, were first established nearly a century ago. Well, no, not nearly a century ago. A century ago in New South Wales and Victoria, and then on and on. And we have a strong membership base that includes diplomats, academics, policymakers, and engaged citizens. Our mission is to foster dialogue on global issues, and tonight's event is part of that ongoing effort to bring world-class expertise to Australian audiences. This evening, we turn our attention to our region, the Indo-Pacific, and the European Union's evolving role in it. The Indo-Pacific is at the heart of global strategy, with the rise of China, with shifting US strategy, and the increasing agency, perhaps, of middle powers shaping the regional order. However, Europe has its own issues at the moment, not least problems within the transatlantic relationship, and of course the future of Ukraine. Nevertheless, the EU, while geographically distant, has signalled a deeper commitment to the region through its Indo-Pacific Strategy, security partnerships, and engagement with ASEAN and other regional players. But what exactly is the EU's vision for its role in the Indo-Pacific? How does it seek to uphold the rules-based international order in an era of intensifying great power competition? And how is its engagement perceived within Asia? To help us unpack these critical questions, we are fortunate to have two distinguished experts with us this evening. First, Professor Jakub Jajoncowski, Chair of the Scientific Council of International Relations at the University of Warsaw, brings extensive experience on great power politics in the Indo-Pacific, the Global South, and India's foreign policy. He's been a visiting professor at leading institutions worldwide and currently holds a visiting position at the Coral Bell School of Asia-Pacific Affairs at the Australian National University. Joining him is Dr. Saroj Aryal, Assistant Professor at the University of Warsaw's Faculty of Political Science and International Affairs. Dr. Aryal is a prolific scholar with research focusing on South Asian security, Indo-Pacific affairs, and great power competition. His work has been published in leading international journals, and he has authored multiple books on India's foreign policy and security dynamics in South Asia. Together, they'll provide invaluable insights into the EU's place in this increasingly complex strategic environment. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jakub Jajoncowski and Dr. Saroj Aryal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for invitation and for such nice words. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here in Australian Institute of International Affairs, and we are very happy together with Dr. Saroj Aryal that we could give some thoughts, our remarks on EU approach towards Indo-Pacific. So once again, great thanks for invitation, great thanks for hosting, and also I would like to express my great thanks to acting ambassador of Poland to Australia, Great thanks for support also our visit. So I would like in my speech to put stress on five elements. First of all, it's a brief overview of evolution of EU approach towards Indo-Pacific. The second part, I would like to say a few words about widening motivation of EU engagement in Indo-Pacific. And in the third part, very briefly, I would like to put stress on interconnection between the war in Ukraine and EU engagement in Indo-Pacific. The fourth part will be focusing on challenges for EU in the new geopolitical situation. And I would like to answer for the question, what does it mean for EU and what does it mean for Indo-Pacific? And the last but not least about Poland, EU and Indo-Pacific. So first of all, very briefly, I would like to present this evolution of EU approach towards Indo-Pacific in the last 15 years. And we could identify three main phases. So the first phase, since 2010 till 2016, EU focused mainly on economic issues. And the EU, despite the different challenges referring to China, put stress on China. Beijing was a main economic partner for EU, and the EU perceived Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific, mostly in the context of economic engagement. So the second phase is between 2017 till 2022. And I think it is a very important phase for EU engagement in Indo-Pacific. First of all, EU decided to go beyond economic. EU understand that it is a coupling between security sphere in Indo-Pacific and EU security. Before, it was a decoupling between EU security and Indo-Pacific. So first time after 2017, EU started to perceive Indo-Pacific more in the context of security engagement. And also first time, and EU started publicly to put that China is not only a partner, but China is a challenger, is a competitor. In the first time in documents adopted by EU Commission, EU put very clearly, very openly, it's not only partner, but also a competitor. And I think after COVID, such a EU approach towards Indo-Pacific has been more and more assertive, and that's why some kind of final stage of this phase is adaptation by EU strategy towards Indo-Pacific in September 2021. And somebody could ask me, is it something new? Is it only document? Is it only declaration? But if you look at this document, you could find out some new, very important elements. First of all, in the second line or first line of this document, EU put stress, explain why EU is interested in Indo-Pacific. Not because of geo-economic, but because geostrategic situation. Because of rising competition between US and China. So it is the first element. The second element of this document, which is very important, is a question about if EU has inclusive or exclusive approach towards Indo-Pacific. And of course, in this document, EU tried to define Indo-Pacific very broadly. Also, they put China. But if you look inside this document, EU is very direct because EU underline one thing. We are interested to have a closer cooperation with like-minded states. And first time in document, EU put stress that EU is interested to develop a closer cooperation in such countries like India, South Korea, and also put stress on Quad. So it is something unusual for EU to put directly the Quad. Especially in the context of relations with China. So it was the second phase, and I think this phase between 2017 and 2020 was very important for putting foundation of new approach of EU towards Indo-Pacific. And the last phase is after 2022. I'm going to talk a little more in a moment about this, but war in Ukraine has changed everything in EU. EU understood one thing. Without support of Global South, without such support from such countries like India, Indonesia, Asian partners, Australia, Japan, it would be very difficult to maintain liberal international order. We must be more active, more engaged also to fight with one more challenge. Challenge is not only troops. Challenge is not only a competition between China and the US. Challenge is also narratives, perception. And if I visit many universities in Asia, in Global South, what is the perception of EU? What is the perception of war in Ukraine? Disinformation challenges. So in this context, after 24 February 2022, we have a more new phase in EU engagement in Indo-Pacific. And EU started to think more in the context of substance. We have document, and now let's fulfill this document by substance. So it is three phases in EU engagement in Indo-Pacific. And in this context also, we should analyze. In the last 10 years, we are also analyze, and we should see the process of widening EU engagement, EU motivation in engagement in Indo-Pacific. 10 years ago, the main motive was connected with China, how to deal with China. From one side, and I remember also in Poland, but in most European countries, 10, 15 years ago, expect a lot of economic investment from China and a lot of students. We expect that all students from China would come to us, and we would have a lot of investment. So, and later, of course, it was a problem when China started to be more assertive, how to deal with this. So it is the first main argument 10, 15 years ago in a bigger engagement of EU in Indo-Pacific. But after 2016, it was another very important argument, which I think it will be very important in next few years, and my colleague will develop this. It is China-US competition. EU is aware of one fact. Bipolar world, increasing competition between US and China is not in favor of EU, because EU will be marginalized. That's why EU is not interested in increasing competition, but because when you have two big players, where's the place for EU? Nowadays, in the context of new development, geopolitical development, we are a witness of this. Moscow, Beijing, and the United States. And where's a place for EU? So EU is not interested in great power politics. because EU is a normative power. So it is the second argument why EU is more engaged to maintain a liberal international order. And in this context, of course, arguments and the motivation number 3 and 4 is connected with what I said a few seconds ago. It is to maintain liberal international order, not only on the global level. It is interconnection between regional order in Indo-Pacific, order in EU, and global order. You couldn't make a divide. Okay, it is only something happened in Indo-Pacific, something happened in Europe. And if you look at the war in Ukraine, it is the best example. If you look at the approach of China towards war in Ukraine, if you look at the behavior of India, if you look at the engagement of North Korea in cooperation with Moscow. So it is arguments that it's very difficult to maintain a liberal international order only in the context or by perceived security only to the limited area. Okay, it is Europe, and let's focus on Europe. So in this context, I would like to summing up to refer to the interconnection. What is the interconnection between the war in Ukraine and EU engagement in the Pacific? A few days ago, some of colleagues from university in Australia asked, what does it mean? Now Europe will be more focused on the European security and will not be so much engaged in the Pacific. In my opinion, it will be quite opposite situation. Europe understood that, of course, it will be a big challenge. It will be a big challenge, but Europe must spend more for defense, but also Europe must be more active globally. And I was born in 78. I was born in 78, and I remember the beginning of the war in Yugoslavia. Nobody, and it was something dramatic because EU, European countries, European communities, they had a lot of money. When you talk about international economics, everybody told about US, Japan, and Western Europe, European Union. But European Union couldn't do nothing in Yugoslavia. And it was different voices. Nowadays, I think I'm, as a person, very optimistic. And also in this context, I think when you look also at the war in Ukraine, despite all differences, European Union tried to impose sanctions. European Union tried to say one voice in this context. So I think European Union, it's a time when European Union understood that it's very difficult to decouple security in Europe from Indo-Pacific or from transatlantic. And one more to sum up. In the 80s, European Union, Western European politicians, decision makers started to think about European security identity. Why? It was in the time when US started to have own policy towards Moscow, Soviet Union. So I think now it will be the high time for Europe to think how to find out own place with new situation, when first time in history we don't have for 100% security umbrella from United States. It is a new challenge because till now, from the 50s till now, Europe could develop, mostly put stress on economic issue because Europe had this security umbrella from United States. Last words about Poland. And I think it is of course by accident, but I think it is great that Poland now has we have Polish presidency at the European Union, because I think Poland knows very well, and despite political differences, we have very good expertise, and we know what does it mean, a threat from Moscow. And it is not, it is based on the evidence. It is not based on the emotion. It is based on evidence which are from 17th century. And the last very strong words. If you look at the documents from Putin from 2008 and 2009, he thought about completely destroying Ukrainian nation. So we must, when one of the very important officials from US Department, from US administration, he didn't nothing refer to what Moscow said about Ukrainian and the Nazis. It is something shocking. And it is, if you look at the, please refer to the documents published by Putin and government in 2008, 2009, 10, and 14. It is clearly put in the documents. It is a plan to destroy not only, it is not only sphere of influence. The aim is very clear, to destroy Ukrainian nation. It is like Holocaust. It is no difference. And we must put stress, and in EU policy, we should talk directly about such situation. Because to have answer for Ukraine, for war in Ukraine, to behavior of Putin, to behavior of Donald Trump, we should be very pragmatic, but based on documents and facts, and read very carefully. And we should identify motives, why Putin behaved like this. And it is not by accident. So thank you very much.
Right. Before we turn to our next speaker, I'd just like to remind everybody online that you can ask questions in the Q&A, but please, yep.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. First of all, thank you, AIIA, for hosting us, Police Embassy for facilitating this, and of course, ANU Professor Kasia Williams for doing all this. So we normally start playing good cup, bad cup always when we give a speech, right? It's very good to talk about EU is heading toward Indo-Pacific, that is going everything in the right direction and everything. So maybe I'll try to do some sort of summing up of what's happening. Maybe I'll have a little bit different viewpoint also, because I'm not particularly from Europe, but I'm working in Europe. So maybe I'll try to bring that perspective on this. So let me start by saying what is the core strength of European Union, be it in Europe, be it in that dealing with any other part of the world. The core strength of European Union is the capabilities to institutionalizing a thing. And another core strength of European Union is rule-based order. Within that, I think it's a high time that we also start looking at the very institutional aspect, that there are lots of incoherency in terms of forming the Indo-Pacific strategy within Europe. There is a European Union's strategy on Indo-Pacific, but there are also lots of member states who have a different Indo-Pacific strategy, right? Including Poland is also planning to have their own. So I think the one big challenge that EU is going to have is how to unify this whole aspect. Maybe in 5 years or so time, European Union needs to revise their Indo-Pacific strategy based on the individual member states' Indo-Pacific strategy. That's one aspect. Second aspect is about rule-based order. So my main concern about EU's rule-based order is if they have a capabilities to counter the another struggle of order in Indo-Pacific, particularly referring it to US and China competition. So it's one thing to talk about it, but in Indo-Pacific, it's a real politic. It's good to talk about rules, values, and everything, but we know that US as a state and China as a state, if the time comes, will go to any extent to break the rules, tweak the rules so that it serves their purpose, right? So if you have a capabilities to position within that aspect or not, that's one thing. Another aspect that we need to talk about when we particularly talk about European Union is a time and a pace. How fast European Union is to make a decision, how fast European Union is to react on something. And Indo-Pacific is very dynamic region. It's moving fast. Many things are happening in a very fast pace. So that's another aspect that European Union need to look into. Another aspect that I'm really much interested with is the word that Professor used is inclusivity, right? So there are lots of institutional constraints that despite European Union wants to do something, there are many institutional constraints. So in terms of that, we have example of their free trade agreements with Japan, their ongoing free trade agreement going on since almost 2 decades with India, right? So there are one small aspect such as GDPR, for instance, Global Data Protection Regulations. Things are not happening. And these are very highly speeding economics, right? They are not going to wait. Just Europe needs to figure out some regulations within that. So I think maybe Europe now, it's a high time that Europe need to think about easing up lots of rules so that they can engage lots of parties in Indo-Pacific. That's some sort of observation and some sort of um recommendation as well. And Indo-Pacific mostly saying it, I also do that. I recently put out the paper about 4 states strategy on Indo-Pacific, including Australia, Japan, US, and India. I try to, of course, map the differences, but what I was trying to say is that we generally deduct it to these emerging powers mostly when we talk about the Indo-Pacific. But by far, Indo-Pacific is a very big region and include lots of small states, which infrastructure strategy status is still very weak. And we have a state like China who will always come with the big pockets, right? Okay, you need 2 billion. Okay, here it is. You don't have to go through the documentation. You don't have to go through all the process that we'll do. Here it is. And if a small state is thinking 2 billion getting today, and getting into debt trapped in 10 years, maybe they will choose to get 2 billion today. So that also something that European Union or West in general need to think about. Uh, uh, about what's happening in past few weeks in Europe, I think it's an excellent opportunity for Europe. Not only from the perspective of their engagement, not only from their perspective on their role in general in international order. I think it's an excellent opportunity for you to be a little bit more independent in terms of getting out of that umbrella of European US. Of course, there are going to be lots of challenges because when we particularly talk about Indo-Pacific, there are states, many states in European Union who have a pre-existing interest there before the forming of European Union, before forming of the Indo-Pacific strategy. You have a country like France, Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, which already had a pre-existing interest in the region. So that's going to be a tricky part how European Union is going to do that. And I also use one terminology. I'm putting out one paper, if I can put it as a more conceptual idea, something called compensating deterrence. If European Union is having some sort of issue with in their, it's a big issue in their eastern border, but European Union need to start engaging more in a other region so that they can have some sort of maintaining of the status quo or whatever going on in the eastern border, but at the same time they will expand their deterrence somewhere else. It's like some sort of tweaking, like Russia trying to do that with US in Syria for long time. So you can also, European Union also need to think about some sort of expanding or compensating the deterrence. They are a little bit weaker in their side, somewhere else. That's another thing. The last remarks about what's happening between US, EU, or in general what's happening in past few weeks, that US is suddenly deciding to disengage in many aspects. I think US and EU have survived something like that before also. Not agreeing with each other kind of thing. Yugoslavia war, Iraq war is some of the aspect that, okay, they had a disagreement, but end of the day they will agree because they are the generally a part of this torch bearer of liberal international order. So they are going to, I think, if European Union hold their firm ground about how they respond to what's happening now, if they came up with the idea to be more like a security institution as along with economy and the political institution, then Europe and US is going to be fine, I think. That's my assessment. Yeah, and the last remark is European Union needs to find this some sort of hard approaches to engage with the small states. Like I already said, just to reiterate that Europe spent lots of money on Indo-Pacific region. But when we talk about the civil perception, when we talk about the government response to what sort of investment that country is doing, I think it's always going to be matter what sort of hard infrastructure investment that European Union is doing. So the money is going, but I think European Union, it's time that it needs to be redirected to the infrastructure development, where a people can see it in front of them working properly functioning in front of them. So having said that, I'll stop here and then we'll have a discussion about it now. Yep.
If you could stay there, that would be great. It would be fantastic if you could both sort of get to the podium. Our cameras are set up to go straight ahead. Again, if you're online, we are monitoring the Q&A, so let us know your questions. Who wants to go first in the room? Matt.
Thank you both. Matt Watts. You've each mentioned geostrategic interests, and we've seen the last few weeks. In terms of the EU's engagement with the Indo-Pacific, do you have any particular views on whether the EU, in its endeavours to engage with the Indo-Pacific, is either hampered or benefited by the absence of an EU army or equivalent?
So we'll collect questions.
No, we'll just go one by one.
Okay, certainly both of us always say that the general understanding, maybe not through the agreement, but the general understanding was EU will engage in socio-politics and economic aspect, and US is going to provide this so-called umbrella of security. That's how mostly liberal international order has been working, right? I think from this mere understanding, like a very foundational understanding of this aspect, I think not having a military presence have cost you at the moment. But I have very high hopes on one thing, although that might be the not be the right hope. But one country that can really play a bigger role in this aspect now, I think, is UK, United Kingdom, considering they already have a big presence in the region, big interest in the region, and they are also not a part of European Union particularly, right? So they don't really have that sort of institutional hindrance that they have to come up with. So maybe there is a possibility for UK to lead this charge. As I said, might not be the right expectation, but that, and we have a countries who have a capable enough in Europe also, France, Netherlands, Poland in many extent have a capabilities to do that. So maybe now it's all have to see how it will develop in upcoming time, but I think, yeah.
Okay, so very good question, because it's question about we should put this question in broader sense. Do we need, as a European Union army, EU army? And when I talk about more assertive, more independent role of EU in global affairs, I think Europe should put what Serge also told in the end. We should think how to deal in the new situation to be stronger in NATO, not to create something alternative. It will be perfect situation for Beijing and Moscow. How to make quarrel in the family between brothers or brother or sister. It is so. The main thing is how to be more coherent and how to coordinate activity. And it is the first thing. So I'm not what Serge told. Let's use the capability and presence of France. Let's have closer cooperation with UK. For many, we have a very good contact as a faculty with the former EU ambassador to Taiwan. And he told a lot of things to me, how European countries unofficially cooperate in Taiwan. I'm not going to repeat. So we have a lot of much more instruments to be more effective. And we should remember about one thing. If we start to play in the game, which game want Beijing and Moscow, we lose. Because we always based the power of Europe and the power of West is not based on military power. It's based on the rule-based order, is especially in the context of middle powers and Europe, Poland, institutions, rule-based order, norms. It is the biggest guarantee of security. So I couldn't imagine that suddenly Europe would be military power in Indo-Pacific. It is not in our interest. So it is. So I would use that more coherent policy, no competition between European leaders, also in the context of presence in Indo-Pacific, and using especially soft power instruments. And I remember when 10, 15 years ago, EU introduced Erasmus Mundus. As a University of Warsaw, we hosted over 60 students from Nepal, 60 or 100 students from India. And it is the way how to try to not how to present our vision of the world, how to underline one thing, that the biggest beneficiary of globalization was not Europe and European Union, but China, India, Asian countries. So I think and the role of UK, it's very important what South said, because now you are also expert, UK. So for such a country like UK is in searching for own role. And we discuss a lot with professors from UK. They are aware they lost after Brexit. So now it is good time to identify own position.
Okay, we do have a question online that sort of bleeds into that, and it's from Charles Funde, and he, it sounds a very nice sort of world that you have outlined there, but he's asking about the sort of potential for actual competition between the EU and China, and maybe even the US in the Indo-Pacific. Is there any room for a more hard-nosed strategy? I note that there has been the EU legislation on investment blocking China from investment in Europe. There's also been tariffs on EVs. I mean, what is the place of hard-nosed competition between China and the EU?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. For me, my personal assessment is just decoupling everything that you have with China is, I think, going to take some time. We still need to think that if US threatening the tariff, and if it starts impacting EU's economy, maybe EU still need to think of how they want to treat China economically. So it's watch and see situation, but for sure the strategic thinking within European Union, especially in Poland, because Poland, if we see the Poland's relations with China when the whole Belt and Road Initiative started, the enthusiasm in Poland was very high. Oh, yeah, Belt and Road Initiative is ending in woods. Lots of things is going to happen, but the enthusiasm is definitely turned into a dissatisfaction or very negative aspect, right? So the whole discussion of European countries and the dealing with China is going down, and it's also going to translate it into their relations with China for sure. But in terms of decoupling or having a very hard line competition, I think it's still time for that. It's not going to be like very soon. That's my assessment.
So it's also coming back to Poland, I remember in the last 5-6 years, also it was a discussion among decision makers about Indo-Pacific strategy to implement, to prepare or not. And it doesn't matter which government. Decision makers was very careful to using the term Indo-Pacific, and everything has changed after the war in Ukraine. Before in 21, it was a lot of delegation from United States, and the United States tried to push Polish government to introduce Indo-Pacific strategy. But in Poland, despite the perception of China has changed, non-government was interested to make China angry. And despite pushing by United States, we tried to omit this issue. Everything has changed, of course, after the war in Ukraine. Now the question is, in new situation, when United States, I think, is not such credible partner, how Europe behave? How Poland behave? So it's I think I agree with Sergeant. Now it's not time to be more anti China. And in this context, one more thing we should take into account. If we take into account Beijing, Moscow, and Washington now, the most pragmatic is Beijing. The most pragmatic is Beijing. So let's wait 1 month, 2 months, and how China behave. Because China could use this time and say, you could count on us. Let's start the business. If Washington and Moscow started to have a business, let's think about EU-China. And in this context, from Polish history, one important thing. In the end of the 70s and the 80s, when in Poland there was a communism, when it was a private party, it was a toast for Polish-China friendship. Why? Because China was treated as an important country in fighting with Soviet Union. And a lot of my professor told, because as I said, I was born 78, so I didn't take part in these parties, but a lot of them made a toast for China. And maybe history will come back. And in the European Union, in Europe, in Poland, in 1 or 2 months, we'll make toast to China. So we could also take into account such a scenario.
Right. If we do come to you in the room, can you tell us who you are, please, Martin?
Hello, Martin Hagan. I know the recent comments by the US Vice President Vance have caused some controversy in Europe. However, I've read his remarks, and there's one point that I want to take up for both of you. one of his points was the you've both mentioned the rule of law as being important for the EU, an underpinning principle, right? A fundamental of democracy is the rule of law. One of his points was that the EU and many member states are appearing to ignore the popular vote in particularly Eastern Europe, Austria, Romania, prior to Tusk in Poland, where there's a more of a conservative right-wing view about things. But many of the governments are hesitating to join in coalition or even talk to them or allow them to be part of the democratic discussion. So how does that weigh up against, what are your reflections about that in terms of rule of law, democracy, and the plurality of voters, or even in some cases, the majority of voters wanting a certain direction and not being adhered to or adopted by governments and the EU in general?
Okay. Thank you so much. It's a very interesting question. I'm interested on this aspect actually. So the rise of right-wing parties in general in Poland, in Europe, have to do with, I think sociologists do this research quite a lot. There's a cycle. If we are in a democratic setup, there will be a right-wing government, but at the same time, in some time, there will be a left government or a center government. It's a cycle. The fundamental thing that when we talk about European Union, what we need to think about is the primary foundation of European Union is the economy and the economic prospect that it has given to a member states, right? And until and unless that is fulfilled, the right-wing government also has complied with European Union in many stances. This maybe put it in a wrong context. The speech itself was more sounded like a vengeance actually. But if we go into a detail, then if there is a right-wing government, if there is a left-wing government or any center government, I think not making them part of a discussion is not a right thing. But if you go in a European Parliament, we have lots of right-wing parties, even far-right parties, right? And they are been part of the discussion at all. It's not as Vance explained that they are not part of a discussion at all. They are. We remember that Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki was in Polish European Parliament few years ago, and all of them were starting and basically shouting on him, and he accepted that, right? So it happens. The discussion is not as bad as Vance explained, but at the same time, we also have to take into consideration that maybe outing them with the larger discussion about or keeping that, making that binary of left and right, I think that's not the right thing. But until and unless EU fulfill its economic promises, the right, left, center, I think everything is going to work out quite fine.
A very short answer. So it's only answer, but I'm not surprised, especially in the context of the crisis of American elites. Crisis is connected with lack of knowledge. But also if we take into account the history, also Saroj and me, we focus on South Asia, on India. So what was the main mistake in the 90s of United States? Lack of knowledge about India, about the context. It is a main problem. So how we could comment is, as Saroj said, if it is the best example of plurality in the European Union member states is that we have, right-wing governments, conservative, change, election, nothing. And for example, in Poland, we have conservative, now we have liberal, we are still in the European Union. Even if we take into account Orban is in the European Union. So it is a best example of a plurality.
And he's still negotiating for the money with you.
Yes, yes. Yes, so I think it is some kind of, and I think maybe he would like to have such situation in the United States, and it is the main issue. And one more disagreement with my colleague Saroj. the main motivation to build the European communities in the 50s was not economic, political reason. Because we were, as a Europe, Western Europe, was afraid of Soviet Union and communism. And of course, we couldn't find the consensus how to build a European political community. France was not interested, and the project collapsed. So we started from economic and spillover theory. So let's start from something non-controversial, economic, later step by step political integration. And I think that such situation, such statement by US, such statement by Putin will push Europe for more integration.
I'll quickly add something. If you see his speech, he spent about 5 minutes to talk about GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations. I wrote a paper about it. So GDPR is something that is stopping lots of multinational companies to do things freely in Europe. And it's motivated by talking about all the businesses, the business elites that they represent in US. So they have a problem with the regulations of European Union. So it's becoming like more and more like current days India, for instance, right? Wherever Modi goes, there is one company go behind him and do a deal, right? So US is going to be like a corporation soon. So they are more attacking the rules and those sort of things. Yeah.
Great. And just for the next question.
Hello, my name is Stephen. I had 2 questions. Am I allowed that? Perfect. Perfect. Hopefully they're brief. I noticed in both of your discussions a surprising absence of other multilateral organizations. Quad was mentioned briefly, but I would have thought the European Union's main partnership would have been to try and leverage interactions with someone like ASEAN. Is the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy impacted by that at all? Or the general lack of multilateral institutions that the EU wants to actually engage with? And my second question is, you've obviously both stressed a lot the rules-based order, the liberal international order, however you wish to name it, but how open do you think the European Union is to changing some of the rules should states in the Indo-Pacific think that renegotiation or re-examination of some of the laws are necessary around whether or not it's decision-making, trade and commerce, whatever it would be?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. It's a very important question. I slightly touched on the umbrella understanding that I'll talk about the institutionalization, right? I think EU is more comfortable dealing with the organization for sure. They have tried that with ASEAN. They have trying since long time with SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. But the thing is, the nature of ASEAN and SARC is very much in coma. The last meeting they had was in 2014, I think, in Kathmandu, right? And ASEAN, the nature of ASEAN itself is also very distorted. Of course, in umbrella economic terms, maybe dealing with each other terms is okay, but when it comes to how they want to deal with China-US competition, or how they want to position European Union within China-US competition, they are still distorted. And despite European Union wants to deal in organizational manner with this organization, regional forums, regional organization, there are lots of limitations for sure. On the other hand, the question about how flexible they are, at this moment, they don't seem flexible. That's exactly what I was trying to say, right? So they need to come up with the more creative idea about making, if not liberal international order, at least rule-based order that European Union have. They need to make it more inclusive, for sure. If they want to engage with a country like India, Indonesia, which are still very much rising. So they are less focused on regulations, less focused on complying with international things, and they are more focused on basically rising, using whatever means they can, right? So when it comes to dealing with these countries, like big countries within the regional setup, like India, Indonesia, I think Europe needs to be a little bit creative.
I would say contrary to colleague that not Europe, but India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa should be more creative, because if they want to change international liberal order, so we are open as a Europe. But please, I would like to remind 2008 and 2009 economic crisis of Western and, or I would say, international liberal institutions, IMF and the World Bank. And it was a huge discussion how to change, how to integrate China, India in this system. And who was not interested to take part in this institution? China, India, because they were not interested to take responsibility. Because it is like in every life, in academia life, we have the same. To be awarded, everybody. But to take responsibility, no, not. So it is human being nature. We would like to have benefits without taking responsibility. So the thing is that I think your question is very important, because what does it mean, rules-based order, international liberal order? It is order based on multilateral institutions, norms created after the Second World War, UN Charter. Rules and assumptions, non-aggression put in UN charters, IMF, World Bank. And of course, we had such a discussion since the beginning of the 90s. And now in one case, I could even agree with Donald Trump. Because, United States and the Western Europe allow China to be a member of these institutions without taking any responsibility. And with taking, okay, you have all benefits, you are beneficiary of globalization, but you don't need to do nothing. So in this sense, I think it is not a question about if Europe is flexible to change, but what kind of alternatives we have on the table. And still we don't have. And very briefly, of course, yes, about ASEAN, ASEM, ASEF, all these institutions, European Union puts stress this in EU strategy, because I only wanted to underline what was the new. They put stress on Quad, the emerging powers, but of course, for EU, still the most important is to have a good cooperation with ASEAN. In the context of Poland, I think the director ambassador of ASEF now is former Polish ambassador to Indonesia, Beata Stoczyńska. But again, it is now the question about substance. I think now ASEAN is in crisis. And ASEAN does not know in which way they should be more active in political and security architecture. If we take into account South Asia, SARC is on the paper. If we take into account, so it is a problem that in Asia-Pacific, in Indo-Pacific, or Asia-Pacific, we don't have still any multilateral institutions responsible for political and security aspects. Of course, we have APEC, but APEC focus more on economic issues. Of course, during the meeting, they discuss also about political issues. So it is again more about reliable partner institutions in Asia Pacific, and if we look at this all dialogue between EU, ASEAN, ASEF, ASEM, so it is, but I think it is on the Asian side.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, wow. Quite an in-depth discussion there. I know that there were a few more questions and there are a couple online, but we're very fastidious about time here. So it's great to hear from you two. Next week, is it next week? No, in a couple of weeks' time, we have another European-themed event on Greenland and Trump. So don't miss that one if you enjoyed this. But for now, I do want to thank my two speakers, and I want to present them with a copy of Australia and World Affairs. This is the volume that we put out every 5 years or so, and it's gone back to 1950. This year, we're very proud to have it published by our new publisher, Cambridge University Press, not just here, but they've also published the entire backlog online. So if you have access to a university library, you should be able to find copies of that all the way back to 1950 online. If you don't have access to a university library, you can buy a copy in the foyer, or you can buy it on Amazon or wherever as well. So thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you.
And thanks a lot. And I hope when we'll meet in 5 years, on the cover, it will be also EU flag.
Okay.